Sorry for the late start, but let's dive straight in. I think we mentioned either last week or 2 weeks ago that often our understanding of certain stories is skewed because we have a tendency to learn the beginning of Parshiot more intently than we do the ends of Parshiot. And I think one of the examples that we mentioned is this week's Parsha right now, Parshas Vayera. The story of Parshas Vayera starts at the end of last week of Lech Lecha. So we know that this week's story, this week's Parsha begins with the three Malachim coming to deliver a message. But who is that message directed at? Right, this is the Malachim coming to tell Sarah that she's going to have a child. Why do we say Sarah? Even though the immediate person that the Malachim were talking to was Abraham, the message is for Sarah because Abraham already knew about it, right? Already by the end of Parshat Lech Lecha, if you look in source Aleph, Hashem had already told Abraham that he says, "V'gam nasatim mimena lecha ben," right? We're in the second line, "Berachtiha v'haytalu bayim," that Sarah will have a child. Also, you won't just have Yishmael from Hagar, but you're also going to have a child from Sarah. And if we look, what is Abraham's response to hearing at the ripe old age of 99 that he's going to be having a child? Vayipol Abraham al panav vayitzchak. Abraham laughs. What is Hashem's response to Abraham's laughter? He laughs and he says, right, I'm going to be 100 years old. Am I going to be able to father a child? My wife Sarah is 90. Is she going to be able to have a child? And Abraham says, Lu Yishmael Yichya B'ni, right? Lu Halavai. It would be great if Yishmael continues to live and be productive. And Hashem says to him, no. And that's going to be he's going to be the one who I establish my bris with, my covenant is going to go through Yitzchak. And then he tells him, and Yishmael is also going to be a great nation. Don't worry, but I'm going to come back a year from now, and Sarah's going to have a child. All of a sudden, we get to this week's parsha. We're not quite sure why Sarah and Avram haven't communicated, but what seems clear is that even though Avram got this message, Sarah does not yet know we don't know the time lapse between Hashem's conversation with Abraham and the three Malachim coming to visit to talk to Sarah. And to be fair, he had just been circumcised at the age of 99, so I don't know how into chit-chat he was. I can imagine not being so social, but it seems like she doesn't know. And now they come and they say to Avram, after all the grand Hachmasas Orchem that we see at the beginning of the Parsha, how he prepares for guests in such an elaborate way, that these three random nomads who he has no reason to think are anything special. He treats them like royalty and he prepares elaborate meals for them. And then they start talking. They ask him, where is Sarah? He says she is inside the tent. He tells them that a year from now, Sarah will bear a child. And Sarah hears this from inside the tent. And it reminds us of Avram v'Sarah zekinim ba'im bayamim chadal liot Sarah orech kanashim, right? Avram and Sarah were elderly in the extreme, right? They're 100 years old, 90 years old. Chadal liot Sarah orech kanashim. Sarah had already stopped. Her body had already transformed into that of an elderly woman. V'titzchak Sarah b'kirva lemor. And she said, really? What do you mean? Internally. She laughs to herself and she says, after I already went through aging, is my body going to transform again to become young? My husband is elderly. Right? So Rashi picks up on the fact that she says V'adonizakin, right? After talking about her own body at the beginning, then all of a sudden she pins it on Avraham. So first of all, if you a little later, this is Rashi points out that when Hashem complains to Avram about Sarah's reaction, so he tells him that she had said that she was elderly, that it wasn't him, and that's the source that you can be mishanem mipnei hashalom, right? That you can kind of twist the truth a little bit to maintain peace between the parties, right? Hashem didn't want to tell Avram that your wife is calling you elderly, so he kind of fudged it a little bit, massaged it a little, right? Fine. That's the famous offshoot of that is the teaching of Beit Hillel, who says, Ketzad meraktim l'fnei hakala. How do you evaluate a bride? Kala na'a b'chasuda. Right? Beit Shammai says, no, kala kamot shehi. Right? You say if the bride is whatever she is, so you say, okay, she has a nice personality, she, whatever it is. Beit Hillel says, no, you can be misham l'fnei hashalom a little bit, right? You can kind of stretch the truth a little bit. Fine. But why, Rashi also picks up, why did she in fact say Badoni Zakin and not talk about her own elderliness? So he brings down the Medrash that her body had already begun to transform, that pure Sanita, she had for the first time in many years, she had undergone her period for the first time in a long time. So she already saw that her body was transforming back. So therefore, what would have been so hard to believe that her husband would be able to father a child? Okay, fine. Let's stop here for now. Any questions? I have many questions. Let's see. Any questions? Oh wait, I'm sorry. We're not done yet. I'm sorry. Vayomer Hashem al Avram. Hashem says to Avram, Lama zetzachaka Sarah limar. Why is Sarah laughing? Ha'af imnam eleva ani zakanti. That she's saying, how could I possibly give birth if I'm so old? Hayipalei me Hashem davar. Is anything impossible for God? Lamoed ashur elecha. I'll come back to you in the appointed time. Ke'ed chayal Sarah ben. Come back in a year, and Sarah will have a child. So Hashem takes Sarah to task for her doubts, for her cynicism. Okay, good. Question?
I have a question about the laughter, because Abraham laughs supposedly out loud for Hashem to hear him. Sarah laughs internally. Hashem knows that Sarah's laughing, but is this an indication of the different relationships between each one of them to God, that one of them is so close that he'll just and the other one, like, she wouldn't deign to laugh out loud because she's keeping this in her heart, and even though Hashem knows her inner feelings, she wouldn't have the chutzpah to laugh out loud. Why is
Maybe. I'm not sure.
He had no compunction about Yitzchak, and she didn't. So
now, in the end, if that is true, she ends up proven right?
Right.
Why is she proven right? Because she gets called to task for her laughter,
right.
Even though it was internal. Whereas Hashem seems perfectly fine with Abraham's laughter.
Yeah.
So, we're in Mayanot. What's up with that, right? That's not okay. Why is Hashem so upset at Sarah, seemingly, and Avram's has the same reaction, and it seems problematic? And it's not problematic. Okay, good. Yeah.
No.
Oh, classic. Okay. Good. Anything else? I also wonder, fine. So we have this discrepancy between Avram's laughter and Sarah's laughter. So let's kick the question down the road a little bit. If you look in the next source Gimel and source Daled, we have the Targum Onkelos. Onkelos was a Tana, right? This goes back a long time. It's a Ger, right? So when people do Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum, so traditionally what it was to learn Targum Onkelos. It's not so easy. It's in Aramaic, so not all of us are that familiar with it. I actually had mixed emotions. My son, I met my son's Chumash teacher, and he told him that they have a big emphasis on Onkelos, which I think is great, because to a lot of us it's not as much of an accessible tool as it could be. So, but when you can use it, as we'll see right now, it can be a very, very, very valuable tool. So if you look on these two psukim of the two laughters of Avram and Sarah, Avram's is pasuk Gimel, is source Gimel, and Sarah's is source Daled. So he uses different verbs to define the same verb of Vayitzchak or Vatitzchak. L'tzachek can mean multiple things. So for Avram, he defines it as v'chadi. Chadi means joy, right? Avram laughed out of joy. It was an expression of his extreme happiness. When he gets to Sarah, he says v'chaychas Sarah, right? It's almost like she smiled. There seems to be something a little bit more jokey about it, right? I guess he's interpreting it as more cynical. Now, I guess that helps us understand Hashem's reaction to them, but what it doesn't tell us is how did uncles know that they each reacted that way, that their laughter was different? Unless you say, how did uncles know that their laughter was different? Because Hashem got upset at Sarah, and he didn't get upset at Amram. But then we're getting a little circular, right? We're being descriptive rather than explanative. So number one, why the difference in reaction, either from Hashem to their similar laughters, or why would we think, right? Sarah was a great figure in Jewish history. Why would we assume that her laughter was somehow more cynical than Avram's pure, unadulterated, joyous laughter?
Because Avram fell on his face.
And what does that imply?
So, it's yira, it's thankfulness, it's sort of like accepting that this is what gonna be. And
Okay, although he does follow it up
sort
with-
of grimaced and grinned, saying, well, yeah, sure, because I'm in this position, how could I have a child? Maybe that was...
Interesting. Okay, good.
Abraham seems to be like a gut reaction, an impulse, like a sudden impulse, whereas Sarah's seems to be internalized, like it's more like sort of based on her own belief of what can be and what can't be. And do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. Now, why would that be? Is this a male-female thing?
I don't see it as male-female. I mean, I see it as
Sarah versus Avram.
that Abraham's reaction was just outward, very, an impulsive kind of a laugh, a gut reaction to something that sounds, well,
Interesting.
a little bit strange.
Okay.
But hers was, it's in the heart. It's from the heart. It's a deeper,
Right.
deeper kind of belief or feeling.
Hers is Birkir Ba'alei Mor, right? Acharei B'losi Hoysali Adna, V'Adoni Zaken. Although to be fair, it says Vayipol Avraham al Panav Vayitzchak Vayomer Belibo, and he says also internally. Now the laughter was seemingly external, but the doubt, Halaben Mea Shana Yivaleit, can I have a child at 100? Can my wife have a child at 90? That was also internal. So I'm not sure. I think you're onto something there. I'm just not sure how to tease it out of the psuk. Yeah.
I have a more fundamental question. It always bothered me that she was punished this way, because it's a natural reaction at age 100 if you're told you're going to have a baby.
100%.
And so why was she so harshly punished?
So I'm not sure. Was she actually harshly punished? I mean, she was
She
chastised.
was killed, wasn't she?
So I don't know if she was killed.
She died right after.
She died while
She dies after. She dies
During
at the end of the parsha, after the Akedah.
Yeah, but
So that was
I always learned it was because of her reactions.
that. I don't know. Could be. I don't know. I'm not familiar with it. But she's certainly chastised. I mean, she goes on to live another 37 years after this, right? Okay. But I think your point, just to drive, yeah.
Could it be just a difference in the personalities? Abraham is sort of the dreamer, the one who shaped the religion, the one that says, I discovered Hashem and now I have to do it. And Sarah was more of the realist and said, well, how are we doing this? And so from the dreamer, yeah, Hashem can do anything. And from the realist, no, I mean, yeah, Hashem could do everything, but he's put in place this motion. We're supposed to get our periods, we're supposed to have, so it's just their reaction to laughter was just from their personalities.
Beautiful. So let's explore that even a little more. Although it's even more striking than we're making it, right? The fact that her body had already started to undergo miraculous changes makes her cynicism even more intense, right? Yeah.
The cynicism and let's say bitterness, she was subjected to years of humiliation with
Right.
Hagar, and the fact that Hagar, held this up to her. And so she was, it was a punishment to her all of those years, just the very presence of this other child. When
Right. exactly.
There was
There was
something that
baggage
I
there.
saw, I was reading in many of the emails that I get, that some of the Chazal say that Sarah was born without a uterus. Did you ever read anything like that?
That's what it seems to say in the Psukim, right? It said, in la rech, right?
Right.
Is that what it says? It's something to that. In la valad, it says. So, in la valad could be, she doesn't have, a valad is what we use for a fetus,
Right.
right? Or it could mean valad as in a uterus at all.
Right.
So I think there's some grayness over there, but it's definitely interpreted by some to mean that. In which case, at that point, her skepticism certainly seems to be warranted. And just one more point, just to highlight this discrepancy. Who's talking to Abraham? And who tells Abraham that he's going to have his child? It is Hashem. Who is telling Sarah that she's going to have a child? We're calling them the Malachim, but to her, these three strangers come by. Why on earth is she obligated to believe these three lunatics who come in off the street and tell an old woman that she's going to have a child?
It's in the heat, right?
Right? What? That's the level of emunah that she has to have, is that she has to believe any stranger off the street who tells her anything. She has to I mean, think about it. If I walk by a homeless person and he says to me, "You're going to win the lottery," so I'm obligated to assume that I'm going to win the lottery that day. Of course, Avram is going to believe it more than Sarah. Look at the source. So, I think maybe we can trace the idea that you mentioned, just that their personalities were different. That Avraham was this dreamer, whereas Sarah was more grounded. Maybe we can trace it back a little bit. I don't want to get overly outside whatever areas I can pretend to know. But to get psychological just for a moment, okay? The first thing that we know, according to, it's a medrash, but it is a very solid medrash. I think that the Ben Ezra even gives it as an example of a medrash that even those who are medrash skeptics assume that this took place. So what's the first story that we know about Avram Avinu? And we remember from the Medrash, even before Lech Lecha, before Hashem goes and tells him to go travel, is right. His father Terach was an idol maker, and he goes and he very cleverly breaks all the inventory, and then he is sentenced to death by Nimrod. Right? They say that's why Or Kasdim is called Or meaning the light, the fire of Kasdim, because he was sentenced to go through to be burnt in the furnace. How does the story end? Right, he emerges unharmed, totally. So Avraham's first encounter with Nes is going through the Kishana Eish, going through the furnace, unscathed. How does the story really end? I have the Medrash, I put it in English also, on both sides, in source Hay. But if you look, there's a footnote to the story on the other side. How does the story really end? After Abraham emerges, or Avram at that point, emerges untouched by the furnace, what happens next? So Avram's brother, Haran, right? Avram had two brothers, three brothers, Nachar, Avram, and Haran. So Haran, we know from the end of Parshat Noach, dies early, and Haran was Avram's brother. Why did he die early? So the Medrash fills in the gap and says, Haran, he wasn't Terach, he wasn't fully into the Avodah Zarah, he wasn't Avram, he wasn't monotheistic. He was kind of hedging his bets. He says, let's see how this goes with Avram, and we'll see. If Avram gets burnt up, then I'm with the Avodah Zarah. If Avram survives, so then I'm ready to join Hashem. So he sees Avram come out, and Haran goes in, and presumably because it wasn't real Amunah, but this kind of, playing it safe, hedging your bets, so he ends up getting burnt in the Kishana Eish. Now, the Pasuk tells us that Haran had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters, right? Who were Haran's children? Number 1 is Lot, right? Number 2 is Milcah, who then marries Nahor, the third brother, Haran and Avram's third brother, and the third one is Yiscah. Yiscah, Rashi brings down the Medrash, was Sarah, right? This actually helps explain a lot. We always think of Lot as Avram's nephew, which he was, but he was also Avram's brother-in-law. So, for example, Rashi brings down the Medrash that Lot was that Lot received a reward for not snitching on. Did we talk about this last week? No? Okay. For not snitching on Avraham when Avraham went and told Sarah to say that she was his sister, right? And he got all the riches and everything. So Lot received a reward for not telling on them. For not saying, hey, no, they're really married. Which seems like a very low standard for a reward, right? To not snitch when your uncle and aunt are trying to save their lives. But the point is, we know how much Lot loved
Sammy
getting stuff,
Berkowitz and
right
Rachel
stuff.
Levine, please come up to Mrs. Detail. Sammy Berkowitz, grade 9, and Rachel Levine, grade 11, please come up here.
And therefore, what he's seeing is, who is all this stuff meant to be for? Sarah's brother, right? Avram's getting it because he's Sarah's brother. He's playing the role of, hey, I'm Sarah's brother, right? So therefore, he gets the reward. It changes the relationship of Lot. When he calls Lot his brother, so often we think about it as Bnei Banim Harayim Kiban, right? That because he was Terach's grandson, so it's as if he's his son, so therefore they're like brothers. But the closer brother
Mrs.
relationship.
Shapiro, could you please call extension 200 or come to the Learning Center? Mrs. Shapiro, please call either extension 200 or come up to me for a second.
The closer brother relationship seems to be the brother-in-law relationship rather than the uncle relationship. But more importantly for our topic, I'm just going to keep talking. Oh no, this is a hard one to talk about. We'll try. So more importantly to our topic, Avraham's first encounter
Good morning,
with the
everybody, and
miraculous.
happy Shabbaton Day. Very exciting. We actually don't have any birthdays today, but with Shabbaton coming and Shabbos coming, I thought I would mention birthdays over the course of the weekend. So tomorrow is Izzy Lumberman, Eliora Kruman, Rachel Kulik, and Ricky Grossman, and Sarah Lipshitz's birthday. So happy birthday tomorrow, guys. And Shabbos is Leora Baumgarten's birthday, so happy birthday to everybody. And we will hopefully get a chance to celebrate together over Shabbos. Take care. Happy birthday.
Sarah's first reaction first exposure to the miraculous is watching her father burnt alive in this Kivshana age. So therefore, maybe what happened is Abraham's outlook became, like you said, the dreamer, the optimist. God can do anything, right? No matter, as long as I'm following what Hashem asks me to do, I don't have to worry about the results. He'll take care of all that, right? I walked through a Kivshana Eish. I went from Orkastim to Haran to Canaan to Mitzrayim to whatever it is. Hashem will figure it out, right? And therefore, maybe when he sees that Yishmael is a bad influence on Yitzchak, okay, it'll work out. It'll be fine. Sarah says, I'll believe it when I see it, right? Not doubting Hashem, but just based on these initial encounters, she believes in Hashem the same way that Avram believes in Hashem. But to bank on, especially the supernatural, Hashem swooping in at the end of to save the day, I'll believe it when I see it. And therefore, Hashem, what's a test? A test is where Hashem tries to find our potential Achilles heel and tries to strengthen it, right? You know, if we're being tested in the area that we're already good at, so that's not that much of a test. My students don't like hearing me say that. But the point of a test is to build up our areas of potential weakness. So is she obligated to believe these three nomads? No, she didn't have to believe 100% that she is going to have a child. But is anything impossible to Hashem? That's the message Hashem is trying to get across, and that's where she didn't come across. Even after she starts seeing the miracles happen, her body starts reacting in miraculous ways. Okay, that's me. What about him? Right? Just this, it does reflect perhaps a real skepticism and a justified skepticism, but that's where Hashem seems to be pushing her, and she doesn't capture that Ta'ipalei Hashem Davar, right? She needed to realize that nothing is impossible, right? That Hashem could do it. Okay? Should we move on? Okay, so let's do one other short idea, and then I want to get to just a general introduction to the Avot that will carry us through much of the first half of Sefer Bereishit. But this, especially going into this week's parsha, in case people need short, punchy ideas, to at least you should have something to work with. So, also in this week's parsha, this week we have 4 big stories, and as opposed to some other parsha which are a little choppy. Over here you have 4 major stories. So number 1 is the Malachim visiting Sarah, visiting Avram. Then they go straight to Sodom. So you have the story of Sodom, where you have Avraham's negotiation, right? Really courageous negotiation with Hashem about the fate of Sodom and the 4 other cities. Right? So originally he asks, if there are 50 tzaddikim, would you save it? Why? Because that would be 10 from each city. And then he starts working his way down, right? Would you save if there are 40? What would you save? What would be saved if there were 40? Presumably, Rashi explains, you would save 4 of the 5 cities that each have their 10. He works his way all the way down to 1, begging for a single city to be saved. And Hashem says, fine, I'll even save it if there are 10. But it turns out that there weren't even 10. So they go to save Lot, either because of whatever merits he had on his own, or there are also sources that he's saved in the merit of Abraham. And they escape, Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters. And as they're running away, Lot complains. He says, "Vayoma Lot aleim, alna Adoni." Adonai. He's referring to the Malach, right? Hinena matzah avdachachim be'einecha, right? I found favor in your eyes. V'tabdol chasucha asher asisa imadi, right? He's being very effusive to them, but he says, "V'anochi lo ochal himalei tahar." I'm not going to make it to the mountain. Pented bakini harav amit, right? I'm not going to make it. This fire and brimstone is Afrit v'melach is going to surpass, to overtake me. I'm not going to make it up the mountain. He says, you know what, do me a favor. Hinena ha'ir hazot krova lanos shama v'hi mitzar. Imalta na shama v'halo mitzar hi utuchi nafshi. Let's go to Zoar. Zoar is a city. It's right here. It's not quite at the mountain yet. Do me a favor, just let's go escape over here. Now, Zoar is one of these 5 cities that is being destroyed right now, that Avraham was negotiating for. And Avraham asks Hashem, and Hashem says, okay, if you can find the 10, you've got it, but I'm not saving. Just, Avraham didn't even bother asking less than 10. And what's the response? Right? They say, okay, fine, we will not destroy, we will not overturn this city that you just requested. Which is striking. Right? Lot is here, as we started talking about last time. Lot is here almost as this foil to Avram. There's, we'll get back to that idea in a second. I think we'll do a little more in still. But Lot never does anything, really good. I think that's probably the best thing that Chazal find to say about Lot, is that he didn't tell on Avram and Sarah. But he's certainly not meant to be any type of heroic or even positive character. He wasn't as bad as Sodom. Okay, so he wasn't as bad as Sodom. Avram goes, he's begging and pleading with Hashem. Avram, who Hashem was deeply in love with. Hashem loved Avram. That is the beginning, that's the seed of the entirety of Jewish history. Avram goes begging for these 5 cities. Nothing works. All of a sudden, Lot comes and says, I don't think I'm going to make it. Can you save Zoar for me? And Malachim say, okay, fine. We'll only destroy 4 cities. I think that the message that we can take from it is that you can't underestimate the power of a tefillah of desperation, right? That when we get desperate, so then it doesn't matter who we are or what we've done in the past or anything. But they say that that even Bisman Hazeh, that we no longer have a mikdash, the Sharei Dima, the gates of tears never close. So what we see over here is Lot, who is really, at best, a mediocre character, somehow was able to accomplish what Avram was not able to accomplish, maybe because of the power of a tefillah of desperation, or a request of desperation. Just to go back for a second back to Sodom, we were saying how Lot is a foil of Avram. So before you even get the last story in our parsha is the Akedah, but before you even get there, there's a previous Akedah in Sodom that Lot undergoes, right, where Lot, he brings in the two guests, and the citizens of Sodom are banging down the door, we want the guests. What does Lot do? He throws his daughters out, saying, you know what, take them, because I have to do Achnasat Orchem. Right? It's almost like a silly type of Akedah, unnecessary type of Akedah, before the demanded type of Akedah. Lot always seems to have incorporated the actions of Abraham, but he seems not to really get it. So he does it in kind of a mechanical way, where he doesn't really get it. He can mimic almost like a parrot, but he's not really getting it and understanding it, leading him to some disastrous and really absurd results. Okay, the third story, before you get to the Akedah, is a familiar one. It almost reads like a rerun, right? What's the third story? After Sodom is destroyed, there's another Ra'av Ba'aretz, and now Avram goes, I think, to Plishtim, Teretz Plishtim, where he encounters Avimelech. Once again, Hemina Achosiat, right? Tell them that you're my sister. He tells Sarah. Sarah once again gets captured. There are some differences between this story and the story that happened last week in Parshat Lech Lecha with Melech Mitzrayim, with Paro. For example, Paro seems to be just stricken, whereas Hashem has a conversation with Avimelech. There aren't so many people in the Torah who Hashem has conversations with. Avimelech is one of them, right? There's some unlikely prophets, right? Lavan has a conversation with Hashem. We wouldn't have necessarily guessed him a little bit later on. And Avimelech also. Avimelech also, we know people like this. Whenever he gets called out, he's like, what do you want from me? I have no idea. It happens with Sarah, it happens again with the well, right? He's a big tzaddik, and if I just would have known, then of course I wouldn't have let any of this happen. But why do we need this story twice? Right? Avram and Sarah lived long lives, presumably eventful lives. We don't hear about the Kishon Aish in the puzzle, and yet the Torah goes through in detail telling us two versions of this Sarah being captured and then Hashem coming in and saving the day, and she emerges untouched. Right? So why did it have to happen twice? I don't know. So maybe we know that in Canaan, there wasn't often water, so there wasn't often rain, so you can have a rav, you have to go somewhere else to get food. But why does the Torah need to tell us about it twice? So I think maybe one important difference is that whereas in Mitzrayim, Paro's reaction to the whole episode is Hinei Ishtecha Kach Balech, get out of here. And then Avimelech says, no, this is great, I wish you would have told me, come, stay with us, let's make a treaty. We know Maseh Botzim Al Labanim, right? That a lot of what the Avot went through in Sefer Bereishit is meant to kind of predict, but more than predict, fortify us with a certain spiritual power in later generations. Right? History has a tendency to repeat itself, and therefore they're undergoing these tests in order to give us the spiritual wherewithal to be able to survive different variations of these tests through the generation. Just for example, skipping ahead to the next story of the Akedah. So there's a medrash that says that when the Malach told Avram, don't slaughter Yitzchak. There's a medrash that says, can I just make a little cut? It sounds horrifying. Like, what's Avram doing? He's not bloodthirsty. So I once heard it explained that as long as it was all just theoretical, that Avram agreed to do it, so then there's a certain koach that's given over, but it was all potential. Avram's saying, let me do an action. I want to be able, the time is going to come where my children are going to have to make horrific sacrifices in the name of Hashem. Let me do an action to be able to give them that kind of strength, to solidify. That's only one strain in the Medrash. There are other strains in the Medrash that don't include that. So perhaps these two stories is the Beis Halevi explains when Yaakov encounters Esav again afterwards. So there's a lot of double language. He says, Hasileni na, save me Hashem, miyad achi, miyad Esav. Right, from my brother, from Esav. It says two languages of fear, two different verbs. And there's a third example, a lot of double language. And Beis Halevi explains, Beis Halevi was the first Rabbi Yosef Tov Halevi, who Soloveitchik, the Rav, was named after. So Beis Halevi explains that he was saying, I'm not sure how Esav is going to react to seeing me, but I need protection from both. If he comes back to me as Esav, Hatzileni. Esav, the warrior who hates me and wants to kill me, so save me from that. But even if he comes back to me as Achi, even if he comes back to me as a brother, still Hatzileni. Because that's also a challenge. And throughout Jewish history, we end up going through these different type of galut, of diaspora challenges. Sometimes we have Hatzileni na miyad Esav, where we're persecuted and oppressed and tortured. And sometimes we have the Hatzileni na miyad Achi, where we're embraced. And that presents its own challenge, because once we get too comfortable with the host culture, with the host society, so that presents a very strong religious challenge that through the ages we haven't been very good at standing up to. So maybe what's going on over here is where Avram and Sarah are going through both Mitzrayim and Eretz Plishtim to give us this strength, both as in a Esav challenge, right? Sarah gets taken captive by a dictator, a brutal dictator, and she emerges untouched. That's last week's parsha, that's Mitzrayim. And then this week we go through it again with an Avimelech who wants to embrace us. And still, she manages to go through the palace, once again, untouched, even though she's taken as a bride. Just totally related, but not our topic for today. That's what makes Megillat Esther so jarring, right? You're reading the beginning of Megillat Esther, like, oh, we know how this goes. The Jewish princess gets taken by the non-Jewish king, and then he likes her, and he takes her, and everything's going to be okay. God is going to come in and save the day. And then the next morning, she's the queen of Persia, and it's just meant to jar us, right? The Megillah is written to an audience that it's assuming knows all these references from Sefer Bereishit. Because this story happens again in 2 weeks, in Parshas Toldos with Rivka. We will talk about it there also. She also goes through it with probably a different Avimelech. So this is this typesetting that we see over and over again, and then Esther just smashes the model And that's what's meant to be so jarring. When we say that Hashem doesn't appear in Megillah Esther, there are times when we're waiting for him, where it seems to be his cue, and he just doesn't show up. That's how we know, wow, this is not the Sefer Tanakh that we're familiar with. Right? This is a Golos Sefer. This is a diaspora Sefer that's bridging the gap in between splitting seas and the life that we live now. Okay, so let's get to this Hakdama, which hopefully will set the stage for much of what comes in the coming weeks. Although next week we might do something different with your indulgence. We'll see. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, right? Thanksgiving. We used to do a Black Friday shear. Not sure if it's going to happen. We used to do a Black Friday shear. One year we even did it in Mocha Blue. We got a nice core, couple of handfuls of students. We used to call it the Anu Mashkimim, Behem Mashkimim shear. That's the language that comes from a siyum. We say we wake up early and they wake up early, right? So everyone's waking up on Black Friday. Anu Mashkimim Umakabim Schach, right? We would get together. But I'm not gonna ask you guys if you're free. It's a Friday. It's not a Thursday. So 2 weeks. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the Avot. This is an approach that is spelled out in slightly different ways. Rav Dessler talks somewhat about this in Mechtav Me'Eliyahu, or as translated in English in Strive for Truth. But more, I learned it from Rav Chaim Yaakov Goldberg, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Keren B'Yavneh, and really in the world of Agada was a real revolutionary thinker. And Machadish. So, although the Nekudot, the seeds of it are, everybody talks about, right? When we talk about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they each have their own particular midah. They each have their own, for now, let's call it characteristic, or area of specialty. But we'll define it a little better in a moment, right? Avram is chesed, tzitin emes, Yaakov chesed la'Avraham, right? Avram equals chesed, Yitzchak equals gvura, strength, and Yaakov is either emet or tiferet, which is the merger of both chesed, which we generally define as loving kindness, but we'll hone in on that a little bit, and the gvura of Yitzchak, Yaakov merged those two together. Those are polar extremes. The chesed of Avraham and the gevurah of Yitzchak, the loving kindness of Avram, and the gevurah of Yitzchak, the strength of Yitzchak, are opposites. Now, what do each of these terms mean? So, what chesed means is that you are active, out there, trying to spread the word of monotheism. There's a God in the world. You're out there to start a revolution, to spread the word that Hashem is there. Okay? And therefore, your derech ha'avoda, the way that you serve Hashem, is going to be very active, constantly going to be doing. You want to affect, impact the world around you, the people around you, and therefore, you're always going to be acting. You're going to be doing things. Yitzchak is gevur. Ezehu gibor, we know from Pirkei Avot, Ezehu gibor, hakovesh et Yitzro, right? Who is a strong person, who is mighty, someone who's able to be kovesh, who's able to quelch his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination. So what does that mean? What Gvura, the Gibor, will serve Hashem internally. Right? When you go out there trying to change the world, so there's a lot of good that can happen, but it's also dangerous. Because as likely as you are to change the world might change you. And therefore the Gibor is always looking to focus on his or her own relationship with Hashem. Right? My job is to be the best Eved Hashem that I can, to serve Hashem in the best way possible. And I can't risk that, I can't jeopardize that by intermingling and going out and doing anything. And therefore, the derech ha'avoda of the Gibor, and we're going to see there are other characters later on beyond Avram and Yitzchak that encompass these extremes, is going to be passive, right? I want to make sure, first, do no evil. It's not a coincidence, we'll talk about it a little bit later on, that Avraham gets the end of Noach, Lech Lecha Vayera. Chayei is basically Avraham and Eliezer. By the time you get to Toldot, Yaakov, I mean, that's the closest thing that Yitzchak has to a parsha is Toldot, but both the major stories in Toldot are Yaakov doing it. We can't really, Yitzchak has a tendency, we're gonna spend some time talking about Yitzchak. Yitzchak has a tendency to get forgotten. We'll do a talk I like to call middle father syndrome, right? He kind of gets lost in the shuffle, but it's not because he was the lesser of the three. It's because the Gibor is not going to make headlines, right? The heroism of a strength personality is going to be internal. It doesn't make for a great story. Okay, that is the Gvura of Yitzchak. Yaakov, his job is to synthesize the two, right? Not just to, if you're going to be the father of a nation, so you can no longer be an extremist, right? You need to somehow merge those two without too much compromise into a complete whole. And that we refer to either as Emet or Tiferet. Okay? These are very big Kabbalistic terms that we're not going to go Kabbalah because I don't know how. But just on a simple level, this is the way that it was explained to me. And therefore you see many different, I just gave you a few here on this chart, but there are many different indicators towards this idea. So for example, Ezer Kenegdo, right? What does an Ezer Kenegdo mean? That your spouse is meant to be a helper against you, right? That you work together, but that you want to find someone who can supplement your own area of weakness. So that's what it seems like they each did, right? Avram, who was the Ish HaChesed, so his Ezer Kenegdo, his wife, was Sarah, whose heroism always seems to be internal, right? We see in this week's parsha, where is she? Hine ba'ohel, right? Rashi brings down that she is Gedola me'Avram b'nevuah, that she had, in terms of her own personal pipeline to Hashem, she was closer than Avram. That's a really dismaying sentiment, right? That Sarah, who we hear so little about, she's not a main, she's a main character, but the point is not that that she's just in the background because she's the wife and we're focusing on the husband. No, we'll see when it comes to Rivka that that's not the case, right? Sarah is the Gibor, and therefore, like Yitzchak, ends up ba'ohel. And her strength is going to be internal as the Ezer Kenegdo. Yitzchak, on the other hand, is the Gibor personality, has Rivka, who is the epitome of Chesed, right? You have the entire, why was she chosen by Eliezer? Based on her kindness. But Chesed, also the way that we described it, is she sees the problem between Yaakov and Esav that first of all, while she was still pregnant, she takes the initiative and goes l'droshet Hashem to ask what's going on. And then later, if you look, we'll talk more about it when we get to Yaakov, that whole scheme of Yaakov going in and stealing the brachot, Yaakov is kind of just she's almost like the mannequin pulling the strings. He does very little. Rivka is running that show, very clearly. So Rivka is the active chesed personality who's there to balance Yitzchak's gvura. Yaakov, on the other hand, who has both of these characteristics, so he needs two wives, right? Rachel has an introduction story very similar to Rivka, and she ends up being the chesed personality, as we'll see later on through her children, particularly with Yosef, although we'll talk about Binyamin also. Leah, so she's the chesed against his gvura personality. Leah is the gvura against his chesed personality, which, again, we'll talk about when we get further to them. Okay, and so let's see we'll do another couple of examples. Psul haba mimenu. What does that mean, psul haba mimenu? That when we talk about midot, I had a mashkiach who always used to talk about midot ben midot, right? Because midot both means personality traits, characteristics, but it also means measurements. that every single midah needs to be tempered, right? The Rambam always talks about the shvil zahav, that you want to go down the middle. If you're an extremist, so it will come out somewhere. So for example, Avraham, who was the chesed extremist, so he had Lot and Yishmael, who, in the end, there were sources, chesed, unbridled chesed, equals gilui harayot, equals sexual promiscuity, right? For example, when it talks about, as we mentioned when it came to Cain, when it talks about the prohibition of the incestuous relationship between a brother and a sister, it calls it chesed. Right? The Torah brands that as chesed. So if you're all about giving, so then there are going to be no boundaries. So Lot, who we saw what he did this week with his daughters, Yishmael, the Gemara brings down that the Gilui Arayot is a problem with Yishmael as well, without getting into details. That comes from Avram. Yitzchak, on the other hand, if you have unbridled, unbounded gvura, so that could lead to murder, right? Because you're just all strength. It's all about me, so I don't care about the other. So Esav comes from him, who had a reputation as a murderer. Yaakov, his job was mitato shlema, right? The reason he needed this balance is that his bed needed to be complete. He needed to be the building block of Klal Yisrael, where there was no Esav or Yishmael coming out from him. So he had to strike the appropriate balance. Okay, Nisyono, their tests. We pointed out that an Nisayon is to test you in your potential Achilles heel. So Avram's test was if he's all loving kindness, what could be the polar opposite of that? Go and slaughter your child. Right? Murder is the extreme of Gvura. Your child, so that would be the test for him. Yitzchak's test is he was never even commanded about the Akedah. So for Yitzchak to go and give up his life, his entire future of Avodah Hashem, just for his father's mitzvah, that's a chesed in the extreme. So that would be his. Yaakov, so he had many tests because of his multifaceted personality, or if you want to harp on the emet as his personality trait, so then he also needed to get down and dirty and play tricks with a lover. Finally, if you just look at his tefillah, and we're running out of time, so we'll just do this quickly. If you look, each one davened, who did they daven for? We find each of them davening. They each created a tefillah, right? Avraham, the Gemara says, Avraham created Shachrit, and Yitzchak created Mincha, Yaakov created Mar. It doesn't really work with the Pesukim, but a joke that I heard a little while ago is that Yitzchak and Rivka have the twins. Everything's going crazy. What does Yitzchak say? Gotta go daven Mincha. At which point Rivka says, you totally made that up. Which he of course did. Okay, but where do we see them davening? So Abraham davens for Sodom. We see him davening for Avimelech. He's always davening for the other, right? Never for himself. Yitzchak, we see him davening for himself. We find him davening at the end of Chayesara. It says that he was davening to get married, that Eliezer should be successful. And then at the beginning of Parshat Toldos, we find him davening for children as well. So he's always davening for himself. That's the Gvura, internally focused. Again, it's not selfish or self-centered. It's just about protecting your own relationship with Hashem. And finally, with Yaakov, we find him davening both for himself and for others. When he says, Haslim miyad achi miyad esav, it says, so Chazal say that he was davening both that he shouldn't be killed and that he shouldn't have to kill somebody else. There's more to talk about when it comes to this. I don't want to hold you over even though I was late. So let's call it a week now, and then let's call it 2 weeks. So I hope to see you all again after that.